You blinked, and 15 years have gone by. Today, we're going to take a quick trip through time and remember 10 games that it's almost strange to think are actually that old. If, like me, you're already over 30, you might be surprised to find out that these games are already that old. And a good example of this is that back in 2008, Ubisoft released Far Cry 2, and a lot of people at the time were left speechless. It wasn't just a direct sequel to the first game. It was practically a reinvention. No more tropical paradise and generic shootouts here, things got a lot more intense. Far Cry 2 threw you into the middle of an African country in the midst of civil war, with malaria, weapons that jammed at the worst possible moments, and a map where every trip was a survival mission. And even though it seemed chaotic, the game had a realistic and almost cruel vibe that kept you hooked. The highlight? The fire system, which spread dynamically and turned any fight into a cinematic hell. At the time, a lot of people turned up their noses. It was hard, it was intense, and it definitely wasn't made for those who just wanted to turn off their brains. But over time, the game gained cult status, precisely because it broke the mold and tried something rawer and more immersive. Far Cry 2 ended up making it smart. Today, with the franchise already on its 6th game and increasingly stuck in a generic Ubisoft formula, going back to the second one feels almost like rediscovering a bold experiment. It's not perfect, but it's the kind of game that still commands respect and makes us wonder how the series could have taken a different path. Some games just age, and then there's BioShock. Released back in 2007, this classic from Irrational Games is still a masterclass in atmosphere, storytelling, and gameplay even today. Seriously, 15 years have passed and BioShock still feels bolder than a lot of modern games. The underwater city of Rapture was a visual spectacle at the time and is still impressive today. That blend of Art Deco with steampunk technology and total decay creates an almost suffocating vibe that few games have managed to replicate. And the best part is, all of that wasn't just for show, it had purpose. It carried narrative weight. The gameplay mixed first-person shooting with genetic powers, creating different ways to take on enemies. And even though the combat wasn't the most polished in the world, the game made up for it with dense atmospheres, unsettling soundtracks, and mind-blowing plot twists. At the time, BioShock received high scores everywhere, but a lot of people only played it years later and were still blown away. And that's where the game proves its strength. It doesn't rely on nostalgia to work. It still holds up and still impresses. Of course, there are a few things that feel dated now, but nothing that takes away from the brilliance of the experience. So, if you've never descended into Rapture, it's time to fix that. And if you have, maybe it's time to remember why this game is considered one of the greatest of all time. Before 2009, superhero games were almost synonymous with disappointment. It was rare to find something that was actually good, especially with the stamp of a major franchise. Then Batman. Arkham Asylum came along and changed everything. Out of nowhere, Rocksteady took a character who had been in a string of mediocre games and delivered a solid, dark, and extremely well-crafted title. The game threw you straight into Arkham Asylum, with that oppressive atmosphere, a gallery of villains, and Batman voiced by none other than Kevin Conroy. It was a perfect recipe. But what really made this game go down in history was its fluid and responsive combat, which became a benchmark for a slew of other games. Several studios tried to replicate that counter-attack system and precise movement. Few managed to do so. The impact was so great that Arkham Asylum not only revitalized Batman in video games, but also paved the way for what would come next, with Arkham City and Arkham Knight. It was the moment when they realized that it was indeed possible to make a superhero game with depth, top-notch gameplay, and respect for the essence of the character. Today, with Rocksteady's future somewhat uncertain, it's impossible not to look back and remember just how special Arkham Asylum was. If you played it back then, you know how magical it was. If you've never played it, go after it. It's a classic that has aged incredibly well and still outshines many modern games. Released in February 2009, Killzone 2 was that moment when Sony slammed its fist on the table and said, "Look at what the PS3 is capable of." If you were following things back then, you probably remember the explosive E3 trailers, the ones that looked like CGI cutscenes and, if you were a bit skeptical, made you suspect they weren't exactly gameplay. But truth be told, Even with all the controversies surrounding the over-the-top previews, the final game landed with impact and surprised everyone. Killzone 2 took everything the first game tried to do and took it to another level. From a somewhat clunky shooter on the PS2, the series became a solid and stylish experience on the PS3. The atmosphere was heavy, gritty, almost suffocating, and it worked. The Hellgas became icons, and the single-player campaign had a vibe that broke away from the generic American military standard of FPS games at the time. The combat was tense, the more measured pace, and the universe had its own unique identity. Everything was kind of brutal, kind of desperate, and really well done. Then came Killzone 3, which tried to be more grandiose, but it was the second one that really put the franchise on the map. But then, silence. It's been over 15 years and no truly new Killzone has appeared. Guerrilla became the Horizon studio, and it seems like they've left the Hellgas gathering dust. And for those who lived through that era of graphical promises and insane hype, Killzone 2 is still a vivid memory. It wasn't perfect, but it had personality, and it was one of the great moments of the PlayStation 3. If you played on PC in 2007, it's very likely that at some point you fell into Portal's trap and fell in love with it. The game seemed small, unassuming, a bonus inside the orange box. But as soon as you started playing around with those portals, everything changed. The concept was simple, but the impact was enormous. Puzzles, a sarcastic AI named GLaDOS, a memorable soundtrack, and the sharp sense of humor that became a benchmark. It was as if Valve had released an experiment that just happened to be brilliant. Portal didn't just make waves, it became a craze. It got a sequel, an excellent one at that, but since then, it's disappeared. There's been no concrete sign of a Portal 3, just grums here and there. Luckily, the community stepped up. There are several mods and fan games so well made they feel official, keeping the experience of puzzling with portals alive. And the craziest part, even after more than 15 years, Portal still feels modern. It's aged like few games ever do. It's one of those titles that seemed to come out of nowhere and showed how pure creativity can leave an everlasting mark. If there's one game that truly deserves the label of a hardcore PC game, it's Stalker: Shadow of Chernobyl. Released in March 2007, it was weird, broken in some ways, but completely unique. It was kind of an FPS, but also an RPG. It was about survival, but also about total immersion in a post-apocalyptic world that made you feel cold just by looking at the screen. For those who played it back then, Stalker felt like a radioactive disaster simulator. You weren't a hero. You were just another person trying to survive in that devastated Ukraine, full of mutants, bizarre anomalies, and hostile factions. No hand-holding. The game just drops you in and good luck. The non-linear structure, the inventory systems, factions, basic needs, all of that influenced a generation of survival games, even if not everyone acknowledges it. And the craziest thing is, the game has aged well thanks to an insane modding community. With the right mods like Anomaly, for example, it turns into a modern, beautiful, and even more intense game. Even with Stalker 2, the original remains strong, ready to be rediscovered. If you're new to PC or have never ventured into the zone, you're missing out on one of the rawest and most intense experiences in the genre. Just don't forget to save often, because the zone doesn't forgive. Some games just don't age. Mirror's Edge, released back in 2008, still feels like an experiment from the future. While the market was diving into grey military shooters, DICE came out with a parkour FPS set in a white, clean world, with touches of red that looked like a secret code. The idea was simple and brilliant. Take the player out of the gunfight and put them in the run. Instead of aiming at enemies, you threw yourself across rooftops, slid down railings, climbed walls, and did all of this in first person, with a sense of movement that still sets the standard today. And the craziest part? Almost no game has managed to replicate that same vibe. The clean, minimalist visuals have stood the test of time. Even though some textures look a bit dated here and there, the artistic style is still impressive. There was an attempt to revive the idea with Mirror's Edge Catalyst, but it didn't quite work out. It lacked that raw boldness of the first one. That feeling of playing something no one else was making. Did the original have flaws? Absolutely. The story was a bit shallow, the action felt weird at times, and it was easy to get lost in the level design. but it was the kind of game that made you think, why isn't anyone else doing this? And to this day, the answer seems to be, because it's not easy. If you've never played it, it's definitely worth checking out. And if you have played it, well, you're probably still waiting for a third game that never came. Because there are some things that time doesn't erase, and Mirror's Edge is one of them. Okay, technically it's over 15 years old, but Half-Life 2 couldn't be left out. Released in November 2004, it wasn't just a sequel, it was a revolution. Think of a game that felt like it came from the future. That was it. The most impressive thing wasn't even just the visuals, which were already incredible at the time, but the physics system that became a benchmark. Objects had weight, volume, and impact. You could stack boxes, use pieces of the environment to solve puzzles, or defeat enemies. The gravity gun became one of the most iconic weapons in gaming precisely because of that. It turned any corner of the map into a creative arena. And the craziest part, more than a decade and a half later, the game is still alive. The community never let go of it. There are mods of every kind. Remakes, VR versions, fan projects turning into their own games. Half-Life 2 became a testing ground that still influences both developers and players to this day. If by some miracle you've never played Half-Life 2, it's an absolute must-play experience. If you have played it, revisiting it today, with or without mods, is still worth every second. Gordon Freeman still reigns, without ever needing to say a word. Can it run Crysis? If you played on PC back in 2007, you probably heard that question more than once. And for good reason, Crysis was the benchmark of its time. Released in November of that year, the game looked more like an alien tech demo than something we could actually play. Visually, it was insane. Crystal clear water, dense jungle, physics applied to everything, and of course, the infamous nanosuit that turned you into a one-man army. But here's the curious part. If you play the original today, without mods or remasters, it hasn't aged all that well. It's kind of clunky, a bit stiff, and the pacing isn't all that great anymore. Even so, its historical significance is undeniable. Crysis was more than just a game, it was a challenge. Anyone who could run it on ultra settings had bragging rights. It was the symbol of the PC master race before that even became a meme. After that, Crysis 2 and 3 went in different directions. More linear, more polished, and with more dynamic gameplay. But that impact from the first game, that visual shock, was one of a kind. And now, look at that, it's been over 15 years. And even though it got a remaster and some belated recognition, there are still people waiting for a Crysis 4, which, at least in theory, is in development. The big question now is, can your PC run Crysis? If there's one game that has aged gracefully, it's GTA 4. Released in April 2008, it was Rockstar's boldest move up to that point. Darker, slower, heavier. Liberty City had never felt so alive, and so depressing at the same time. While people were expecting another wild ride like San Andreas, what they got was a story about immigrants, the mafia, a violent past, and that so-called American dream that never comes. Nico wasn't a hero, nor a villain. He was just a broken guy trying to fit into an even more broken world. The physics were a show in themselves. The way bodies reacted, the cars, the characters stumbling, everything had weight. Literally. And even though a lot of people complained about the clunkier gameplay, the truth is that it gave the game its own unique charm. And of course, GTA 4 is still alive today thanks to the modding community. Even though the PC version was a nightmare for years, the community turned the game into a true showcase of graphical experiments and improvements. In the end, GTA 4 may not have been everyone's favorite, but it was essential. It paved the way for bold narrative choices, deepened the franchise's universe, and proved that a sandbox game can also be dense, introspective, and still incredibly fun. So that's it. These were some games that are already over 15 years old but are still going strong. It's kind of crazy to think that some of them still look more modern than a lot of new stuff out there, right? Now I want to hear from you. What was that game you found out is way older than you thought? The one that surprised you when you saw its release here? If you enjoyed the video, you know what to do. Leave a like, and if you want to see more finds like this, just stick around. See you next time. Bye-bye.